Montana Territory, 1878. The morning sun cast long shadows across the valley as Heath Anderson guided his horse along the ridge overlooking Elkhorn Creek. At 26, Heath had already lived more lives than most men twice his age: cowhand, trail driver, reluctant gunslinger, but none had brought him what he secretly longed for. The cool autumn air carried the scent of pine and distant wood smoke as he surveyed the landscape, his lean frame tense with habitual vigilance. No room for softness out here, he muttered to his dappled gray stallion, Storm. The words had become a mantra over the years. The West takes more than it gives. Heath's angular jaw tightened beneath a day's worth of stubble as he adjusted his worn leather gloves. His eyes, sharp and the color of a summer sky, missed nothing as they scanned the horizon. 10 years ago, he'd watched his father's ranch burn at the hands of cattle rustlers, along with every dream of stability the Anderson family had nurtured. Since then, Heath had drifted from outfit to outfit, taking pride in his skill with cattle and horses, but never allowing himself to put down roots. The Double R Ranch had been his home for 8 months now, longer than he'd stayed anywhere since his father died. Old man Rafferty paid fair wages and ran an honest operation. But Heath knew better than to grow comfortable. Attachment led to loss. Trust led to betrayal. The frontier had taught him that lesson over blood and tears. "Come on, boy," he said to Storm, turning toward the ranch. "Mr. Rafferty's waiting on our report." He'd been sent to check the north pastures for strays, and the ranch owner would be expecting him back. Heath took pride in his reliability. It was one of the few things he could control in an uncontrollable world. That, and the careful distance he maintained from others. As he crested the final rise before the ranch came into view, Heath spotted an unfamiliar wagon approaching from the east. Narrowing his eyes against the sun, he made out 2 figures on the bench seat, an older man and a young woman. Visitors were rare this far from town, especially as winter approached. Curiosity piqued, Heath guided Storm down the slope toward the main house. By the time he reached the yard, the wagon had pulled up at the hitching post. The older man, stout, white-haired, and clearly road-weary, was helping his companion down from the seat. When the young woman turned, Heath felt the world shift beneath him. She couldn't have been more than 20, with hair the color of wheat in late summer, pulled back in a simple braid. Her traveling dress, dusty from the journey but well-made, was a soft blue that matched the forget-me-nots that grew along the creek in spring. Despite the weariness evident in the set of her shoulders, she carried herself with quiet dignity. "That'll be Rafferty's brother and his daughter," said Cal, one of the older hands, who had materialized beside Heath. "Heard they were coming from back east. Reckon the girl's name is Nora or some such." Heath nodded wordlessly, unable to tear his gaze away as the young woman looked around the ranch yard, her expression a mixture of apprehension and determination. When her eyes met his, something electric passed between them. Heath quickly looked away, dismounting in a fluid motion born of years in the saddle. "Better report to the boss," he muttered to Cal, leading Storm toward the stable. "Heath," Rafferty's booming voice halted him. "Come meet my family." With reluctance dragging at his boots, Heath approached the small gathering on the porch. James Rafferty stood beaming beside his brother and the young woman, whose features now revealed a striking resemblance to the ranch owner. "Heath Anderson, my finest hand," Rafferty announced proudly. "Heath, this is my brother William and my niece, Miss Nora Zimmerman." "Ma'am," Heath managed, touching the brim of his hat. Up close, her eyes were the deep green of mountain forests, framed by long lashes that cast shadows on cheeks flushed from travel. "Mr. Anderson," she replied, her voice soft but steady. "Uncle James speaks highly of your abilities." "Just doing my job," Heath replied stiffly, discomfited by the warmth in her gaze. "Nora's mother passed last winter," Rafferty explained. "She and William are joining us permanently. I'm thinking we'll convert the old foreman's cabin for them. It needs work, but it'll give them privacy." Heath knew that cabin well. It sat empty at the edge of the ranch compound, weathered and neglected since the previous foreman had left 2 years ago. "Roof leaks," he found himself saying. "Chimney needs repointing before winter." "Precisely why I'd like you to oversee the repairs," Rafferty said, clapping a hand on Heath's shoulder. "You've got the skills, and you can spare time from your regular duties." It wasn't a request. Heath nodded curtly, already calculating the work required and how it would disrupt his carefully constructed routine, his carefully maintained distance. "I don't wish to impose," Nora said, her eyes meeting Heath's with unsettling directness. "No imposition, Miss Zimmerman," Heath replied formally. "Just part of ranch work." That evening, as the hands gathered in the bunkhouse, speculation ran rampant about the new arrivals, particularly the niece. Heath sat apart, methodically cleaning his saddle, trying to ignore the chatter. "Pretty as a picture," young Joey Coleman sighed. At 19, he was the youngest hand and still prone to romantic notions. "Too fine for the likes of us," Cal chuckled. "Eastern educated, from what I hear. Came west because her pa couldn't maintain their standing after her ma died." "She don't act high and mighty," countered Mick, the cook's assistant. "Saw her helping with supper like she's done it all her life." He focused on the leather under his hands, pushing away the memory of those green eyes. Women like Nora Zimmerman didn't belong in places like this. The frontier would break her spirit, or worse. He'd seen it happen. The West was no place for tenderness. The following morning, Heath rode out early to check the cabin. The structure was sound at its core, but years of Montana winters had taken their toll. As he inspected the roof, he heard the approach of a horse. Turning, he was startled to find Nora dismounting a gentle bay mare, her riding habit practical for the ranch though still bearing the unmistakable cut of Eastern tailoring. "Good morning, Mr. Anderson," she called, tying her horse to a hitching post. "Uncle said you'd be here." Heath climbed down from the roof, uncomfortable with her unexpected appearance. "Miss Zimmerman, this isn't a fit place for a lady just yet." A smile curved her lips, revealing a dimple in her right cheek. "I've come to see my new home. And please, call me Nora. Miss Zimmerman makes me feel like a schoolteacher." "It's not proper," Heath replied stiffly. "Propriety seems a luxury out here," she observed, moving past him into the cabin without waiting for permission. Heath followed reluctantly, watching as she examined the small, dusty interior with thoughtful eyes rather than the disgust he'd expected. "It has good bones," she declared, running a hand along the stone fireplace. "And that view is worth every hardship." She gestured toward the window, which framed the distant mountains perfectly. "Winter's coming," Heath warned. "Those mountains look different when you're snowed in for weeks." Nora turned to face him fully, her expression serious. "Mr. Anderson, I understand you think me some delicate Eastern flower. Let me assure you, I am not. My father and I have endured more than you might guess." The quiet dignity in her voice stirred something in Heath that he'd long thought dormant. He shifted uncomfortably. "I'll have it habitable within 2 weeks," he said, reverting to practical matters. "The roof and chimney come first." "I'd like to help," she said. When he began to protest, she raised a hand. "Not with the roof, of course, but I can scrub and paint and make curtains. This will be our home. I should have a hand in creating it." Heath wanted to refuse, to keep the distance that had protected him for so long. But something in her steady gaze broke through his defenses. "As you wish," he conceded. "But you'll need proper clothes for the work. Those fine things won't last a day." "I've already spoken to Mrs. Rafferty," Nora replied with that same surprising smile. "She's lending me work dresses until mine arrive from town." Over the next days, a pattern emerged that both unsettled and intrigued Heath. Each morning, after completing his essential duties with the cattle, he would work on the cabin. And each afternoon, Nora would arrive, exchanging her morning chores at the main house for labor at what would become her home. She worked without complaint, scrubbing years of dust and grime from the plank floors, washing windows, and applying fresh whitewash to the interior walls. He found himself watching her when she wasn't looking, the determined set of her jaw, the graceful efficiency of her movements, the occasional soft humming that escaped her lips. On the 4th day, as Heath repaired the stone hearth, Nora appeared with a basket. "Mrs. Rafferty sent lunch," she announced, setting it on the newly scrubbed table Heath had repaired the previous day. "She said you worked too hard on too little." Heath wiped his hands on a rag, suddenly aware of the sweat and dust that covered him. "Your aunt is kind. She worries about you," Nora replied, unpacking bread, cheese, and cold meat. "Says you keep too much to yourself." Heath accepted the plate she offered, maintaining careful distance. "The work gets done. That's what matters." "Is it?" Nora asked, settling on a chair across from him. "Is that all that matters, Mr. Anderson?" The directness of her question, and her gaze, flustered him. "Heath," he said abruptly. If I'm to call you Nora, then it's Heath. Her smile was like sunrise. Heath, she repeated, as if testing the name. Tell me, Heath, how did a man so young become so solitary? He nearly choked on his bread. That's mighty forward, Miss Nora. Life is short, she replied simply. The last year has taught me that. My mother's illness was sudden and merciless. 1 month she was planting a garden, the next she was gone. Heath stared at his plate, uncomfortable with the raw emotion in her voice. I'm sorry for your loss. As I am for yours, she said quietly. When he looked up sharply, she explained, Uncle mentioned you lost your family young, that you've been making your own way since you were 16. Heath's jaw tightened. Rafferty talks too much. Or perhaps too little, Nora countered. He respects you greatly. Says you're the finest horseman and most reliable hand he's ever employed. Yet he knows almost nothing of your past. Past is past, Heath replied curtly. Out here, it's what a man does today that counts. Is that why you came west? To escape the past? Heath set down his fork, his appetite gone. I was born west, Miss Zimmerman. Never been east of the Mississippi. And I work from sunup to sundown. So if you'll excuse me. He rose abruptly, nearly knocking over his chair in his haste to escape her perceptive gaze. Outside, he took several deep breaths of the crisp autumn air, steadying himself against the cabin wall. When Nora emerged minutes later, she made no mention of his hasty departure. Instead, she simply returned to her work, humming softly as she arranged her cleaning supplies. The sound followed Heath up to the roof, where he hammered with unnecessary force, trying to drown out both her melody and the unwelcome warmth it kindled within him. That night, Heath dreamed of fire for the first time in years, of his family's ranch engulfed in flames, of his father's body lying broken in the yard, of his own desperate flight into the darkness. But this time, the dream changed. As he ran from the burning homestead, a figure appeared on the path before him. Nora, her wheat gold hair illuminated by the distant blaze, her hand extended toward him. He woke in a cold sweat, the bunkhouse dark and filled with the sonorous breathing of sleeping men. Slipping outside, Heath stood under the vast Montana sky, stars scattered like diamond dust across the blackness. The air held the sharp promise of frost, winter's advance guard. Fool, he muttered to himself. She's not for the likes of you. 3 days later, disaster struck. Heath was working on the cabin chimney when shouts erupted from the main ranch. Scrambling down, he ran toward the commotion to find the hands gathered around the corral, where Rafferty's prized stallion, Thunderbolt, was rearing and bucking wildly, eyes rolling in terror. Snake spooked him, Cal explained as Heath approached. Now he won't let nobody near. The stallion was a magnificent animal, black as midnight with a white blaze. He was also dangerous when frightened, capable of killing a man with a single kick. Rafferty had imported him from Kentucky at great expense, intending to improve his breeding stock. Where's Rafferty? Heath demanded. Rode to town with his brother. Won't be back till sundown. Heath assessed the situation quickly. The frightened horse was working himself into a lather, and if he continued, he risked injury or worse. Open the gate to the small paddock, Heath instructed. Let's give him more space. The men complied, creating an escape route for the animal. As the gate swung wide, however, a new complication appeared. Nora, apparently unaware of the danger, was crossing from the main house toward the stables, her path taking her directly past the paddock. Nora, Heath shouted. Stay back. His warning came too late. At that precise moment, Thunderbolt spotted the open gate and bolted toward freedom and directly toward Nora. Time seemed to slow as Heath vaulted the corral fence and sprinted toward her. He saw her eyes widen in understanding, saw her freeze in momentary terror as the massive horse bore down on her. Heath reached her just as Thunderbolt did, tackling her out of the animal's path. They hit the ground hard, Heath taking the brunt of the impact as they rolled through the dirt. Thunderbolt thundered past, missing them by inches, and continued into the open range beyond the ranch buildings. For a moment, Heath lay stunned, Nora's weight pressed against him, her breath coming in quick gasps against his neck. Then reality returned, and he quickly helped her to her feet, his hands automatically brushing dirt from her shoulders before he caught himself and stepped back. Are you hurt? He asked urgently. Nora shook her head, her face pale but composed. Thanks to you, no. She winced slightly as she put weight on her right ankle. Perhaps a slight sprain, but nothing serious. Several hands had rushed over, concern evident on their faces. "Miss Nora, you all right?" Joey asked anxiously. "I'm fine, truly," she assured them, though she swayed slightly as she spoke. Heath made a swift decision. "She needs to sit down. Joey, tell Mrs. Rafferty what happened. Cal, get some of the boys and round up that stallion before he hurts himself." Without waiting for acknowledgement, Heath swept Nora into his arms, ignoring her startled protest. "You can't walk on that ankle," he said firmly, carrying her toward the main house. "This is hardly necessary," Nora objected, though her arms had instinctively circled his neck. "Humor me," Heath replied, acutely aware of her warmth against his chest, the scent of lavender in her hair. "I've seen too many small injuries turn serious from neglect." At the house, Mrs. Rafferty fussed over Nora, examining her ankle and declaring it only mildly sprained. "Bed rest for the day," she pronounced, and no arguments. Heath retreated to the porch, oddly reluctant to leave entirely. He stood there, hat in hands, until Mrs. Rafferty emerged some minutes later. "She's asking for you," the older woman said with a knowing smile that Heath chose to ignore. He found Nora in the parlor, her ankle elevated on a footstool, a quilt tucked around her despite the warmth of the day. When she saw him, her face brightened in a way that made his heart stutter. "My hero," she said with a small smile. Heath shuffled awkwardly. Any of the boys would have done the same. "Perhaps," she agreed. "But it was you who reached me first. You who risked being trampled to save me." He shrugged, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Just instinct." "Is it?" Nora tilted her head, studying him. "I think there's more kindness in you than you're willing to admit, Heath Anderson." Heat crept up his neck. "Your ankle needs rest," he said gruffly, changing the subject. "I'll get back to work on the cabin. Your father will want to move in soon." "You're doing a wonderful job," she said earnestly. "It already feels like home." Something in her voice, a note of vulnerability beneath the strength, caught at Heath's carefully guarded heart. For a moment, he allowed himself to imagine what it might be like to create a home rather than just a shelter, to build something permanent. The thought terrified him. "I'd best go," he said abruptly. "Afternoon light's good for finishing that north wall." As he turned to leave, Nora called after him. "Heath? Thank you. Truly." He nodded without looking back, afraid of what his face might reveal. The incident with the stallion changed something between them. Though Nora was confined to the main house for several days, Heath found reasons to visit, bringing samples of paint for her approval, asking about placement of furniture, even delivering a small posy of late wildflowers for her recovery. Each time, their conversations grew longer, more personal. Heath learned that Nora had been studying to become a teacher before her mother's illness had diverted her life's course. She spoke 4 languages, loved poetry, and had never been west of Chicago until now. In turn, he found himself sharing small pieces of his own past, how his mother had taught him to read by lamplight, how his father had shown him to gentle horses with patience rather than force, how he'd once dreamed of having his own ranch. "You still could," Nora said one evening as they sat on the main house porch, the first stars appearing in the darkening sky. Her ankle, almost healed, was still propped carefully on a low stool. "Have your own place, I mean." Heath shook his head. "Those days are gone. Land's getting carved up, prices climbing. A cowhand's wages don't stretch that far." "You could partner with someone," she suggested. "Uncle says you've saved more than most men your age." "Partnership means trust," Heath replied, his voice hardening. "Trust gets people killed out here." Nora was silent for a long moment. "What happened to your family, Heath?" she finally asked. What really happened? The question hung between them in the gathering darkness. Heath stared out at the distant mountains, considering deflection or even outright departure. But something in the quiet acceptance of her presence beside him loosened the tight bands around his chest. "Raiders," he said, the word like gravel in his throat. "Men my father had hired. They waited until he'd sold a herd, then came for the money." The familiar numbness spread through him as he continued. "Pa refused to give it up. It was our future, everything he'd worked for. They shot him, burned the house with Ma inside." Nora's sharp intake of breath cut through the night air. "And you?" "I was checking fence lines. Saw the smoke. By the time I got back." He swallowed hard. "Too late to do anything but bury them. You were just a boy." Nora whispered. 16, Heath confirmed. Old enough to track the men who did it. Old enough to find them in a saloon 3 towns over, drunk on my father's money. What did you do? The question was so soft he barely heard it. Heath's hand unconsciously moved to his side, where a knife scar ran along his ribs. What I had to. Only one walked away. The memory of blood and gun smoke filled his nostrils. Afterward, I just kept moving. Figured stillness was dangerous. Figured caring about people, places. It only gives fate something to take from you. He felt Nora's hand cover his where it rested on the porch rail, a touch so gentle it nearly undid him. You were protecting your family's honor, she said, no judgment in her voice. But Heath, shutting yourself away from life. That's letting those men win again and again, every day. Heath turned to look at her, finding her face luminous in the faint light spilling from the house windows. Some wounds don't heal, Nora. All wounds change us, she countered. That doesn't mean we stop living. The truth of her words, and the compassion behind them, threatened to crack the walls he'd built so carefully. Heath stood abruptly. It's getting late. Your father will worry. Nora made no move to stop him as he strode away, but he felt her gaze following him into the darkness. The cabin was completed the following week, and William Zimmerman and Nora moved in with much celebration from the ranch community. Heath kept his distance during the small gathering Rafferty hosted, watching from the edge of the festivities as Nora welcomed guests into her new home, her face alight with pride and pleasure. The coming winter drove ranch work into high gear. Cattle to move to lower pastures, hay to stack, buildings to reinforce against snow. Heath threw himself into the labor with singular focus, rising before dawn and working until he was too exhausted to think, much less feel. He avoided the Zimmerman cabin and its golden-haired occupant as much as possible. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. 3 weeks after the cabin's completion, the first major storm of the season struck. Snow fell in blinding sheets driven by howling winds that cut like knives through the heaviest coat. The hands were confined to the bunkhouse, venturing out only to care for the stock in the nearest barns. On the second day of the blizzard, Heath was checking the horses when Kel burst into the stable, snow coating his beard and eyebrows. Heath, Rafferty needs you at the house, quick. What's happened? Heath asked, instantly alert. It's old man Zimmerman, Cal explained as they battled through the storm toward the main building. Went out to check their woodpile and took a bad fall. Broke his leg, maybe worse. Miss Nora managed to get him on a horse somehow and brought him here in the storm. Doctor can't get through from town. Heath's heart hammered against his ribs as they reached the house. Inside, chaos reigned. William Zimmerman lay on a makeshift pallet in the parlor, his face gray with pain, while Rafferty and his wife hovered anxiously. Nora knelt beside her father, her clothing soaked through, her face nearly as pale as his. When she looked up and saw Heath, naked relief flooded her features. Heath, she said, rising unsteadily. Thank God. What do you need? He asked without preamble. Father's leg is broken, maybe in multiple places, she explained, her voice remarkably steady despite her obvious exhaustion. And I fear he's developing a fever. Uncle has sent for the doctor, but in this storm. I've set bones before, Heath offered. Not as good as a doctor, but it might help until one arrives. William groaned from the pallet. Do it, young man, before I lose my nerve. The next hour tested Heath's resolve as he carefully examined, then set the older man's fractured limb. Nora assisted without flinching, holding her father still when necessary, wiping his brow when pain overwhelmed him. Her composure impressed Heath almost as much as her tenderness. When the ordeal was finally complete, William fell into an exhausted sleep aided by Mrs. Rafferty's laudanum. Nora sagged against the wall, the last of her strength seemingly depleted. You need to rest, Heath told her firmly. You're soaked through and half-frozen yourself. I can't leave him, she protested weakly. Mrs. Rafferty will watch over your father, Heath countered. And you'll be no good to him if you fall ill too. Rafferty nodded agreement. Listen to Heath, Nora. There's a bed prepared upstairs. We sent Joey to check on your cabin. The fire's out, but otherwise all is secure. The animals, Nora began, are being tended, Heath finished. Now go, before I carry you upstairs myself. A ghost of a smile touched her lips at the memory of their last such encounter. Very well, but wake me if there's any change. Heath found himself volunteering to sit with William through the night, allowing the Raffertys some rest. As midnight approached, he sat beside the sleeping man, listening to the storm's fury outside the sturdy house walls. The parlor door opened quietly, and Nora slipped in, wrapped in a borrowed robe, her hair hanging in a single braid over one shoulder. "You should be asleep," Heath admonished gently. "I tried," she said, settling into a chair across from him. "But every time I closed my eyes, I saw him falling, heard his cry of pain." She shuddered. "If anything happened to him, it didn't," Heath interrupted. "He's strong, and the leg will heal. Thanks to you." Nora studied him in the lamplight. "You've had to be doctor before, haven't you?" Heath nodded. "Out on the range, men get hurt. You learn to do what's needed." "Is that your philosophy for everything? Do what's needed?" "It's kept me alive. But has it let you live?" Nora leaned forward. "There's a difference, you know." The question unsettled him. Before he could formulate a response, William stirred on his pallet, murmuring in discomfort. Nora was instantly at his side, soothing him with gentle words and a cool cloth on his forehead. Heath watched her ministrations with a growing ache in his chest, not just admiration for her care, but longing for something he'd denied himself for too long. Connection. Belonging. Home. The storm raged for 3 days. Throughout, Heath divided his time between essential ranch duties and helping care for William, whose fever finally broke on the morning of the 4th day. The doctor arrived that afternoon, praised Heath's handiwork with the splint, and prescribed several weeks of complete rest. "He can't stay at the cabin alone," the doctor said to Rafferty. "Stairs would be dangerous, and he'll need regular care." "He'll stay here," Rafferty decided. "We've plenty of room, and Mrs. Rafferty can keep an eye on him during the day." "And I'll return to the cabin," Nora said, her tone making it clear she expected opposition. "It's only a short walk away, and I can check on Father frequently." Predictably, both Rafferty and the doctor began to protest, citing the dangers of a young woman alone, especially with winter settling in. Heath listened to the debate with growing certainty of what needed to be done, what he wanted to do. "I'll stay at the cabin," he said, his voice cutting through the argument. All eyes turned to him in surprise. "Near enough to help if needed, far enough for propriety. I can sleep in the lean-to storage room." Nora's expression was unreadable. "That's very kind, Heath, but unnecessary." "I'm perfectly capable." "I know you are," he interrupted. "But your father would rest easier knowing someone was close by. And so would I." Their gazes locked across the room, some unspoken current passing between them. Finally, Nora nodded. "Very well. If Father agrees." William, propped up on pillows and considerably more alert than the previous days, gave a dry chuckle. "Seems I have little choice but to be coddled like an infant." "Yes, Anderson, I'd be grateful for your presence. But only until I'm mobile again." And so Heath found himself installed in the small storage room adjoining the Zimmerman cabin, his few possessions transferred from the bunkhouse. The arrangement was meant to be temporary, a few weeks at most. But as November deepened into December, bringing shorter days and longer nights, something unexpected began to take root. Each morning, Heath would rise before dawn to complete his ranch duties, returning to the cabin by dusk. Nora would have dinner waiting, simple fare but prepared with care. They would eat together, then often read by the fire or simply talk. Sometimes they would walk to the main house to visit William, whose recovery progressed steadily if slowly. In those quiet evening hours, the walls Heath had built around himself began to crumble. He found himself sharing stories of his travels, of the beauty he'd seen across the territories, of the dreams he'd once cherished. Nora listened with genuine interest, offering her own thoughts and experiences in return. "I never thought I'd find peace here," she confessed one snowy evening as they sat before the hearth. "When Father announced we were moving west, I was terrified. I imagined barbarians and constant danger." Her smile in the firelight made Heath's heart turn over. "Instead, I found something unexpected." "What's that?" Heath asked, almost whispering. "Possibility." Nora's eyes reflected the dancing flames. "Back east, everyone's path seems predetermined. Here, the land is still being shaped, just as the people are. There's room to become something new." Her words resonated deeply with Heath. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to imagine a future different from his solitary existence. A future with warmth and connection at its center. Christmas approached, bringing preparations for the small celebration the ranch would host. Heath helped Nora decorate the cabin with pine boughs and red ribbons. Surprised by the pleasure he took in such simple tasks shared. When she discovered he had never received a proper Christmas gift, her indignation was both amusing and touching. "Not even as a child?" she demanded. "We celebrated," Heath clarified. "But practically. New boots, maybe, or a warm coat. Necessities dressed up as gifts. This year will be different," Nora declared with such conviction that Heath didn't dare argue. On Christmas Eve, a clear, cold night with stars scattered like frost across the black sky, Heath accompanied Nora to the main house for dinner. William, now able to move short distances with crutches, presided at the table alongside Rafferty. The meal was festive, the conversation lively, but Heath found his attention continually drawn to Nora, radiant in a deep green dress that matched her eyes. After dinner, as was tradition, gifts were exchanged. Heath had agonized over what to give Nora, finally commissioning a leather-bound journal from a craftsman in town, remembering how she'd mentioned missing having a place to record her thoughts. When she unwrapped it, her eyes widened in delight. "Heath, it's beautiful," she breathed, running her fingers over the embossed cover. "How did you know?" Heath shrugged, embarrassed by her obvious pleasure. "You mentioned wanting to write again. Thought this might help." "It's perfect." The warmth in her voice made him flush. "Now mine seems inadequate in comparison." She handed him a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. Inside, Heath found a finely crafted pocket knife, its handle inlaid with mother-of-pearl. "I noticed your old one was nearly worn through," Nora explained. "This one belonged to my grandfather. Father wanted you to have it, for taking such good care of both of us." Heath stared at the gift, overwhelmed by its significance. A family heirloom, passed to him as though he belonged. "I can't accept this," he said hoarsely. "You can," William interjected firmly. "And you will. A man should have a good knife, Anderson. And we owe you a debt that can't be repaid with trinkets." "You owe me nothing," Heath protested. "Perhaps not," Nora said softly. "But we wish to give nonetheless." Something fundamental shifted in Heath that night, a recognition that perhaps the scars of his past didn't have to determine his future. As he walked Nora back to the cabin through the crisp, starlit night, a new sense of possibility filled him. At the cabin door, Nora paused, looking up at him with an expression that made his breath catch. "Thank you for the journal," she said. "But even more, thank you for these past weeks. For showing me that strength doesn't have to mean isolation." Before Heath could respond, she rose on tiptoe and pressed a kiss to his cheek, her lips warm against his cold skin. Then she was gone, the cabin door closing softly behind her, leaving Heath standing in the starlight with his hand pressed to his face and his heart hammering in his chest. January brought harsh weather and new challenges. A pack of wolves, driven by hunger, began preying on the ranch's cattle. Rafferty organized the hands into hunting parties to protect the herds. Heath, despite his new duties at the cabin, joined the efforts, often returning late and exhausted. Nora worried visibly about these expeditions, especially after one hand returned wounded from an encounter with a particularly bold wolf. Her concern touched Heath deeply, another thread binding them together in the quiet intimacy they had established. On a bitter cold morning in late January, Heath joined Rafferty and several other men to check the northwestern pasture where tracks had been spotted the previous day. The sky hung low and threatening, promising more snow by nightfall. "We'll split up," Rafferty instructed. "Cover more ground. But no one rides alone, understood? Two-man teams, and be back by midday. Storm's coming." Heath paired with Cal, heading toward a rocky outcropping that had shown wolf sign previously. They had just reached the area when the first snowflakes began to fall, earlier than expected and quickly thickening. "We should head back," Cal suggested, eyeing the rapidly deteriorating conditions. Heath nodded agreement, but as they turned their horses, a gunshot echoed across the landscape, followed by a distant shout. "That came from the ridge," Heath said, already urging Storm toward the sound. "Someone's in trouble." They found Joey and another hand, Mick, near the ridge line. Joey's horse lay dead in the snow, while the young cowboy himself sat clutching his leg, face contorted in pain. "Wolves," Mick explained tersely as Heath and Cal dismounted. "3 of them. Spooked Joey's horse. It stepped in a hole, went down hard. Joey's leg is broken, I reckon. Heath knelt beside the injured man, confirming Mick's assessment. We need to get him back to the ranch. Storm's picking up fast, Cal warned, snow already coating his hat and shoulders. Visibility's dropping. Heath made a swift decision. Cal, you and Mick head back. Let Rafferty know what's happened. I'll stay with Joey. Get him mounted behind me once you're gone. That's crazy talk, Cal objected. We stick together. 3 horses with 4 riders in a blizzard is asking for more accidents, Heath countered. Storm is the strongest mount and knows the way home. We'll be right behind you. Reluctantly, the others agreed. Once they departed, Heath helped Joey onto Storm, mounting behind the injured cowboy. The snow was falling in earnest now, the wind driving it horizontally across the landscape, obscuring landmarks. Heath relied on instinct and Storm's sure-footed nature as they made their slow way back toward the ranch. But the storm intensified beyond even his expectations, transforming the familiar terrain into a bewildering white void. Joey, increasingly affected by pain and cold, slumped against him. Stay awake, Heath ordered sharply. Talk to me. Can't feel my feet, Joey mumbled. Heath's concern deepened. They needed shelter, and soon. Changing direction slightly, he guided Storm toward where he believed a lined shack stood, a small one-room shelter stocked with basic supplies for just such emergencies. Time lost meaning in the whiteout conditions. Heath's face numbed, his hands stiff despite heavy gloves. Joey had fallen silent, his breathing shallow. Just as Heath began to fear they had missed the shack entirely, Storm nickered and stopped. Through the curtain of snow, Heath made out the dark shape of the small structure. Relief flooded him as he dismounted and half-carried, half-dragged Joey inside. The shack was basic, a single room with a small stove, narrow cot, and shelves stocked with essentials. But it was shelter. Heath worked quickly, getting a fire started in the stove, wrapping Joey in the available blankets, and improvising a splint for his leg using materials at hand. Once the younger man was stable, Heath attended to Storm, bringing the horse into the relative protection of the shack's small attached lean-to. As darkness fell, the storm showed no signs of abating. Heath knew they were trapped until morning at least. He maintained the fire, melted snow for water, and found enough supplies to make a meager meal. Joey, warmer and more comfortable, finally slept. Heath sat by the stove, listening to the wind howl around the small shelter. His thoughts turned inevitably to Nora. Would she worry when he didn't return? The idea both troubled and warmed him. In the months since they'd met, she had become central to his thoughts in a way no one had been since his family's deaths. The revelation struck him with sudden clarity. He loved her, not with the cautious affection he'd been willing to acknowledge, but with a depth that terrified and exhilarated him in equal measure. He loved her intelligence, her courage, her compassion. He loved the way she challenged him to be more than his past, to see beyond his wounds to possibility. And with that realization came fear, bone deep and familiar. To love was to risk loss. To open his heart was to make himself vulnerable to the very pain he'd spent years avoiding. Dawn brought marginal improvement in the weather. The snow had stopped, though drifts had accumulated to dangerous heights. Heath knew they needed to reach the ranch. Joey required proper medical attention, and the supplies in the shack wouldn't last another day. Using the shack's small axe, Heath fashioned a crude travois that could be pulled behind Storm. He settled Joey as comfortably as possible on the conveyance, covering him with every available blanket. We'll make it, Heath assured him, though uncertainty gnawed at his gut. The temperature had dropped further overnight, and the journey would be treacherous. They set out in the pale morning light, Heath leading Storm on foot through the deep snow. Progress was agonizingly slow. Heath's muscles burned with effort, his lungs aching from the frigid air. Several times they were forced to stop while he cleared a path through particularly deep drifts. By midday, Heath's strength was flagging. Joey had lapsed into unconsciousness, his breathing worryingly shallow. The ranch seemed no closer despite hours of effort. Doubt crept in. Had he chosen the wrong direction? Were they moving in circles? Just as despair threatened to overwhelm him, Heath heard it, the distant sound of voices calling his name. Summoning his remaining energy, he shouted in response. Minutes later, shapes materialized through the snowy landscape. Rafferty and 3 hands on horseback, leading a sled. Thank God, Rafferty exclaimed as they reached Heath. We've been searching since first light. Joey needs a doctor, Heath managed through cracked lips. Broken leg, possible frostbite. The men quickly transferred Joey to the sled. Rafferty tried to persuade Heath to ride as well, but he refused, insisting on riding Storm despite his exhaustion. Stubborn as ever, Rafferty muttered, though respect colored his tone. As they approached the ranch, Heath's vision began to blur, his body finally succumbing to cold and exertion. He was vaguely aware of arriving in the yard, of hands helping him dismount, of concerned voices surrounding him. Then, cutting through his disorientation, a single voice reached him. "Heath!" Nora's cry pierced the fog enveloping him. He turned toward the sound and saw her running through the snow, heedless of the cold, her face a mask of fear and relief. "You're alive," she gasped, reaching him just as his knees buckled. "We feared the worst when you didn't return." Heath tried to reassure her, but the words wouldn't come. The world tilted sideways as darkness closed in. He awoke to warmth and the scent of lavender. Blinking slowly, Heath found himself in an unfamiliar bed, heavy quilts tucked around him. A fire crackled in a nearby hearth. As his vision cleared, he recognized the room. He was in the main house, in one of the guest chambers. A movement beside the bed drew his attention. Nora sat in a chair, her head bowed over a book, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders. As if sensing his gaze, she looked up, their eyes meeting. "You're awake," she breathed, setting aside her book. "How do you feel?" Heath took stock. His extremities ached with the lingering effects of cold, and exhaustion weighed heavily on him, but nothing seemed permanently damaged. "Alive," he answered honestly. "Joey, the doctor's with him now," Nora replied, leaning forward to press a cool hand to Heath's forehead. "His leg was badly broken, but he's young and strong. They expect him to recover fully." "How long have I been asleep?" "Nearly 24 hours. You were suffering from exposure and exhaustion." Her voice caught. "They said if you'd stayed out much longer." The unspoken fear in her eyes twisted something in Heath's chest. "I'm sorry for worrying you." Nora shook her head, tears suddenly brimming. "When they brought you in, barely conscious, I thought." She looked away, composing herself. "I realized something, Heath." "What's that?" he asked, his heart beginning to race despite his weakness. "That I couldn't bear to lose you." She met his gaze directly, vulnerability and determination mingling in her expression. "That somewhere between arguing about cabin repairs and Christmas dinner, I fell in love with you." The words hung in the quiet room, momentous and irrevocable. Heath stared at her, wondering if he was still delirious with cold, if he had imagined the declaration he'd longed to hear. "You don't have to say anything," Nora continued quickly, misinterpreting his silence. "I know your feelings about attachments, about trusting people. I needed you to know. Life is too unpredictable, too precious to leave important things unsaid." Heath reached out, capturing her hand in his. "Nora," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I've been running for 10 years. From the past. From connection. From the possibility of loss." He drew a deep breath. "But somewhere between pulling you away from a runaway horse and Christmas Eve, I stopped wanting to run." Hope illuminated her face. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I love you too," Heath answered simply. "And it terrifies me. But not loving you, that terrifies me more." The smile that broke across Nora's face was like sunrise after the longest night. She leaned forward, pressing her forehead to their joined hands. "I thought I'd lost you before I ever truly had you," she whispered. "I'm right here," Heath promised, tugging gently until she met his gaze again. "And I'm not going anywhere." Their first kiss was gentle, a confirmation rather than a revelation, the natural conclusion to a story that had been writing itself since their first meeting. When they parted, Heath saw in Nora's eyes the same certainty he felt in his own heart. Recovery brought clarity. As February mellowed toward March, Heath regained his strength while helping William complete his own convalescence. The older man had observed the growing relationship between his daughter and the young cowhand with thoughtful consideration. One evening, as Heath prepared to return to the bunkhouse, his temporary quarters at the cabin no longer appropriate given the changed circumstances, William asked him to stay behind. "Walk with me, Anderson," he requested, gesturing with the cane he still used for support. "As far as an old man with a healing leg can manage." They made their way slowly across the ranch yard, now muddy with melting snow. The air held the first tentative promise of spring. I wasn't always a banker, you know, William began abruptly. Started as a farmer. Had land in Pennsylvania, not much different from ranching in principle. Working the earth, battling the elements. Heath listened, sensing the older man was building towards something significant. When my wife died, William continued, I considered many options. Could have stayed east, maintained our position. Nora could have married well, had suitors aplenty. He paused, gazing toward the mountains. But I saw something in her eyes, a yearning for more than society's narrow path. So I chose the harder road, bringing her west. She's flourished here, Heath observed. Yes. William nodded thoughtfully, but not in the way I anticipated. I thought perhaps she'd find purpose in teaching or community building. Instead, she found you. Heath's steps faltered. Sir, William raised a hand. Let me finish. I've watched you these past months, Anderson. Seen how you treat my daughter, with respect, consideration. How you risked your life for that young cowhand. Character reveals itself in crisis, and yours has proven exceptional. I've made mistakes, Heath admitted. Things in my past. We all have pasts, William interrupted. It's what we do with them that matters. You've chosen to learn from yours rather than be consumed by it. That's rare. They had reached a small rise overlooking the ranch buildings. William stopped, turning to face Heath directly. I know you love my daughter, he stated plainly. And she loves you. The question is, what do you intend to do about it? Heath took a deep breath. He had been considering this very question for weeks, weighing his fears against his hopes, his past against his potential future. With your permission, sir, he said formally, I would like to ask for Nora's hand in marriage. William studied him for a long moment, then nodded with evident satisfaction. Permission granted, but I'd suggest not waiting too long. Spring brings many changes to a ranch, including, perhaps, new opportunities. The cryptic statement puzzled Heath, but the older man would say no more, turning back toward the house with a slight smile playing about his lips. 2 days later, Rafferty summoned Heath to his office, a small room off the main house parlor where ranch business was conducted. Heath entered to find both Rafferty and William waiting, their expressions unreadable. Sit down, Heath, Rafferty invited, gesturing to a chair. William and I have a proposition for you. Mystified, Heath complied. Rafferty leaned forward, hands clasped on his desk. I'm getting older, the rancher began without preamble. This winter showed me that more clearly than I'd like. Running the double takes more energy than I have some days. You're as strong as any 2 men half your age, Heath objected loyally. Rafferty chuckled. Kind of you to say, but we both know better. The truth is, I've been considering taking on a partner, someone who understands cattle, knows the land, and has the drive to help expand the operation. Heath's pulse quickened as understanding dawned. Sir, I'm offering you a partnership, Heath, Rafferty confirmed. 5% ownership to start, with the opportunity to increase your stake over time through both work and investment. The offer was so unexpected, so far beyond anything Heath had imagined possible, that for a moment he couldn't speak. William will be investing as well, Rafferty continued. His banking experience and capital, combined with your practical knowledge and my existing operation, could make the double one of the most successful ranches in the territory. Why me? Heath finally managed. Because you see this land the way I do, Rafferty answered simply. As something worth fighting for, worth building on. Because you've earned the respect of every hand on this ranch. And because, if I'm reading things correctly, you'll soon be family anyway. Heath looked between the 2 older men, emotion threatening to overwhelm him. I don't know what to say. Say yes, William suggested with a smile. And then go ask my daughter that question you've been pondering. The next evening, Heath led Nora up the same rise where he had spoken with her father. The setting sun painted the mountains in hues of gold and purple, the valley stretching before them like a promise waiting to be fulfilled. It's beautiful, Nora breathed, her hand warm in his. It is, Heath agreed, though his eyes were on her rather than the landscape. The past months had only deepened his love for this remarkable woman who had somehow breached the walls around his heart. Your father and your uncle made me an offer today, he began, watching her expression. A partnership in the ranch. Nora's face lit with pleasure. Heath, that's wonderful. Did you accept? I told them I needed to discuss it with someone first. He took both her hands in his. Nora, if I accept, it means staying here. building something permanent. It means believing in a future I never thought I'd have. Understanding dawned in her eyes. And is that what you want? To stay? To build? Only if you're building with me. Heath dropped to one knee, still holding her hands. Nora Zimmerman, I've spent 10 years running from connection, from the possibility of loss. But you've shown me that a life without love isn't living at all. He swallowed hard, his voice rough with emotion. I love you. Will you marry me? Tears spilled down Nora's cheeks as she nodded, joy illuminating her face. Yes, she whispered. Oh, Heath, yes. He rose and gathered her in his arms, their kiss a seal on promises made and a future envisioned. As they stood together on the hillside, the first stars appearing in the darkening sky, Heath felt the last shadows of his past recede. The cowboy who had believed the frontier too harsh for love had found his home at last, not in a place, but in the heart of a woman who had shown him that even in the Wild West, love could not only survive but flourish. Their wedding took place that May, when the valley bloomed with wildflowers and new calves dotted the pastures. The entire ranch gathered to celebrate as Heath and Nora exchanged vows beneath an arch of spring branches. Rafferty gave the bride away in the absence of William, who proudly walked his daughter down the makeshift aisle. As husband and wife shared their first dance on the packed earth of the ranch yard, Heath looked around at the community that had become his family, Rafferty and his wife, William, the ranch hands who had accepted him as both peer and now partner. The loneliness that had been his constant companion for a decade was gone, replaced by a sense of belonging he had thought forever beyond his reach. What are you thinking? Nora asked softly, following his gaze. Heath looked down at his bride, her green eyes reflecting the lantern light, her weak gold hair crowned with flowers. I'm thinking that for the first time since I was 16, I'm not afraid of tomorrow. Nora's smile held all the promise of the years stretching before them. Neither am I, she whispered, rising on tiptoe to kiss him as the fiddles played and their new life began beneath the vast Montana sky.